Welcome, everyone, to another Swapcast or joint podcast episode of the Foreign Policy Focus and Around the Empire podcast. I'm Kyle Anzalone, and I'm joined today by Joanne Leone and Dan Wright. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Kyle.
Hey, Kyle. Great to be here with you guys.
Yeah, so I am really excited about what we have planned for today. Back almost 2 years ago now, I recorded a marathon episode one night with Joanne and Dan, and these are the episodes 211 through 213 of the Foreign Policy Focus podcast. And they are by far the most complimented episodes of the show. Even till today, I will get emails from people or see those shows shared saying how well those stand up. And essentially what we did on those shows is went through and debunked all the lies that they were telling, all these narratives that they were spinning. And I think what we did is dissected Russiagate in a way to make it very clear that the government or the Russiagators had absolutely no case standing. So I'm hoping that what we could do on today's show, though, is dig into what's been happening over the past couple months as the wheels have completely fallen off this narrative. And I think in a way we get to go on a little bit of an attack here and really seek and look for the truth. And so, I mean, we've had revelations like the Flynn charges being dropped, the case against Concord Management being dropped, and now we have the list of the people who look to unmask Flynn. And so maybe I could kick it over to Dan first to kind of just, I don't know, how have you felt in the past couple months to see all these things that, you know, we are talking about in the past episodes of the show? And listen, if you think that Russia hacked the election, go back and listen to those episodes. Don't listen to this one first, because you're going to, you know, just be wallowing in your biases the whole time and getting angry and sending me nasty messages on social media. So don't do go listen to the other episodes first. But I don't know, Dan, just tell me, what have you thought as all those, you know, speculation that we had about John Brennan and what actually happened with Michael Flynn, as all the facts come out, we are pretty much solid on it.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey. Let's just put it that way. When this happened years ago, it seemed pretty obvious, and perhaps the most obvious person who got destroyed initially was Mike Flynn. And it seemed so obvious that he was being targeted by a group of people who had probably personal as well as political issues with him. But there was always a question of, okay, what's the actual there in the investigative sense? Like, what is the actual underlying issue? What's the underlying crime? Is Trump a Russian agent? At one point, at the height of the hysteria, probably one of the worst commentators of all time, Jonathan Chait, over at New York Magazine, actually posited that Trump had been recruited by the Soviets, meaning not just that the Russian helped him win the election in 2016, but he had been a Soviet and then Russian agent for a period of 30 years, I guess, or more. So as we were beginning, the last time we were on the show, we were at the height of the hysteria, and we saw, you know, at one point, Rachel Maddow said the Russians are in control of our government, a million grifters, the Krasenstein brothers, the Seth Abramson, all these people who have come out of obscurity to grift on this, make a little bit money on Russiagate. It's been quite a circus, but the music has kind of slowed down and then went silent as the Mueller report came out, and people who had been expecting a sort of cathartic destruction or an arrest. In fact, many people were openly fantasizing that Trump was going to be literally arrested and taken out of the White House for being, I guess, a foreign agent. But here we are, the Mueller report out. It's a bit of a dud. The only people who've been prosecuted for anything, as was true, I think, even at the time we did this, were people who had lied about, I think Manafort, who had lied about his taxes. And actually, since that time, Roger Stone has gone again for lying. He is actually not a Russian agent. He lied about a connection to Julian Assange. I mean, this guy literally talked himself into a prison cell. I have no idea why someone has that much need to feel relevant. But in any case, it's over. And I just personally thought, okay, I knew this was a scam from the get-go. Many people knew that. We knew there was no there. We knew the Democrats were going to give it their best shot. And eventually they kind of did a bait and switch and went after Trump for something really completely different, which was the Ukraine scandal, which had nothing to do with Russia. In fact, it would have, if anything, helped Russia in a sense or been against Russia. It's not exactly clear. And so But now, because of this independent prosecutor, I would argue, this guy Durham, and the fact that the Attorney General, Bill Barr, or is it Bob Barr, is basically deciding to actually look into how this started, we're now actually seeing revelations of what went on those many years ago, seemingly many years ago, which is that there were people who absolutely abused their position. Now, the smoking gun for at least me and Joanne had always been that how did this piece that was published in January 2017 by David Ignatius in the Washington Post, and Ignatius is a known CIA, he like kind of launders CIA talking points. Who gave him this intercept? This is highly classified intelligence. This was an intercept of communications by the National Security Agency, the NSA, between Michael Flynn, who was the incoming but not yet appointed National Security Director, or the National Security Advisor, I should say, and the Russian ambassador, Kislyak, who gave David Ignatius this information. And what we're finding out, because of Richard Grenell's declassification and publishing by, I think it was one of the senators he gave it to, possibly Rand Paul, it's not clear, that like all these Obama officials had been looking at this secret intelligence. This is supposed to be, they're not supposed to be violating some guy's privacy. But what's interesting is, including Joe Biden, which is, I'm sure, going to become a political football, but it's not as interesting to me because Joe Biden looked at it after, I think it was the day of the publication, which means it's unlikely he was the source of the leak to the Washington Post. The person me and Joanne have repeatedly, endlessly pointed at as the likely leak against Flynn, because they personally hate each other with the heat of 1,000 suns, is John Brennan, who, as the unmasking documents show, had it a month before the Washington Post story, which is why he's still my number one suspect. But in any case, it's clear now that there was a violation of pretty basic laws, the highest classification, and it was leaked to target Flynn. And what it at least appears to me was partly about maybe personal animosity. It's clear him and Obama hated each other. It's clear him and Brennan hated each other. He did, of course, go on stage in the Republican National Convention and scream, "Lock her up," about Hillary Clinton. Not a guy who made a lot of friends among certain circles in D.C., but it's also about his policy. He was openly saying he wanted a more conciliatory policy towards Russia. That was not what a lot of people in the defense and security establishment wanted, or want now. And so it looks like he was targeted deliberately, or it's not looks like, he was targeted deliberately to be put out of play, to be a piece taken off the board. And now, this many years later, we might actually figure out who did it. So that's kind of where we're at, but it has been it's been a journey, Joanne.
Yeah, I mean, I've kept an open mind, a little bit of it got more and more close as time went on, but I've always been willing to believe that there was some skullduggery going on, that there were. I still think that there are some things underneath, that there's more to this than maybe we'll ever know. But I did keep that open mind. I read the other opinions, and there was just there were escalating levels of absurdity in my view. And just to build on a little bit, just mention a couple things, Dan. We started our podcast in, I believe it was December of 2016. It was just, right after the election. And I can remember back then in December and January, we were already suspected Brennan, right? And it was because of his history, but it was also the way he was acting. I'd never seen a CIA director act like that in public, which was kind of interesting.
He was telling on himself, really.
I mean,
if you look at it now.
It's funny. He's been, a liar and a cheater, which is what, the intelligence agencies do for a living, for his whole life. And he's still not that good at it, really. But anyway, and we, I don't know, Kyle, maybe just mention we have the rise and fall of John Brennan set of episodes too, that maybe we'll link if people are interested in those. But yeah, so we suspected him from the start, and we were never disappointed. And just to go through again, why Flynn? Why this massive operation against Flynn? And it had started before Trump even announced for president. I mean, I guess it's possible that Flynn was already talking to Trump in the 2014 timeframe, but that's really when they started going after Flynn with a vengeance, right? That's when they set him up in England they said that Svetlana Lakova was a Russian agent and was a honeypot, and that he had an affair with her, and he was compromised, and this and that. So they tried that all the way as far back as 2014, and I think that's when he was fired from, well, forced to step down. But I think there are a whole ton of reasons, and way more than we even know, as to why Obama and Brennan, and I would argue the Clintons too, really, really hate Flynn. And
Syria's
to
got to
some
be a big
extent,
one.
yeah. So first of all, Flynn was an insider. The rest of the Trump campaign, they were still pretty clueless, right? But Flynn kind of like knew where the bodies were buried, right? Flynn had also, in many different ways, had a stated objective. First of all, he had criticized the CIA and the intelligence apparatus. I don't use the word community because I think it's ridiculous. So the whole intelligence apparatus, he, over time, as he was in the military and in combat zones, he was really furious at the way that everything worked, the way the intelligence, whole system worked, and he didn't feel that it worked well for the military. So there was sort of a CIA military rivalry kind of thing going on, or CIA DIA rivalry.
Right. He was head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, which, for those who don't know, is a Pentagon's rival to the CIA. So there is a kind of turf war aspect to this.
And more than that, like when we did an interview with John Kiriakou, I believe it was in January of 2017, even he, who is one of the biggest critics of the CIA, you could hear they have no respect for the DIA. They think that they're clowns and they're inferior. The CIA has a very superior, attitude. So anyway, so that was one of the reasons. And then so he had laid out, he wanted to restructure the intelligence agencies. He really wanted to make big changes. That was going to threaten a lot of people. Also, Brennan had done his own sort of big reorganization of the CIA, at least, and maybe he thought maybe that was his brainchild, and didn't want it meddled with. And then in 2012, the DIA report on Iraq and Syria and ISIS turned out to be prescient. It was a warning as the Obama policy. Flynn was extremely derogatory toward the Obama's foreign policy in Iraq and Syria, and the rise of he predicted the rise of ISIS and caliphate.
Most notably, though, it should be noted, is the CIA arms program for the, quote, moderate rebels, which at that time was overseen by John Brennan at the CIA. So he openly attacked Brennan's program and said basically it was going to lead to the rise of a force that almost very presciently, almost prophetic, if I can use the term, of ISIS. He basically said something like ISIS is going to form with this CIA program that John Brennan's running. And lo and behold, not only was it true, but of course Brennan saw the report, and there was no love lost after that, for sure.
Yeah, we didn't get to see that report until much later. And Flynn actually went out on a sort of an interview tour. I remember a very controversial interview that he did on Al Jazeera. And so, things like that. Also, during the campaign, obviously they're going to hate him because he's sided with Trump, because I think Flynn was a Democrat before that. And a lot of people say that he led the cheers on Lock Her Up. But if you actually watch the video, the crowd is yelling "Lock her up" like they did at every rally. And he just kind of stood up there for a little bit and he laughed about it. And then he joined in for like one half-hearted "Lock her up." He didn't lead the cheer. He really didn't. But just that was enough, right?
Well, that was enough for that crowd.
Yeah. And also, I've seen another clip where after a terror attack in France, Flynn actually went on air and was ranting about radical Islamic terrorists and the Obama policies, being a total failure. Flynn opposed the Iran deal. Now, I don't know, did he do anything in the background to undermine it? I don't know. On election day, it was November 8th, 2016. Flynn, there was an op-ed published in The Hill, and it's titled, "Our Ally Turkey is in Crisis and Needs Our Support." And just one quote from it is, "The Obama administration is keeping Erdogan's government at arm's length, an unwise policy that threatens our long-standing alliance. The primary bone of contention between the U.S. and Turkey is Fethullah Gulen, a shady Islamic mullah residing in Pennsylvania, whom former President Clinton once called his friend in a well-circulated video. So you can see here why the Clintons are probably really pissed off at Flynn too, because this is like 5 months after the attempted coup on Erdogan, which happened in the summer of 2016. So, and then we know later that James Woolsey ratted Flynn out for being in some kind of a meeting where they were going to possibly try to extract Fethullah Gulen, because Erdogan was standing his ground and he was like not going to cooperate. It was he had pretty lot of reasons to be upset about that coup, and whether they were trying to pacify Erdogan or they had I don't know. I think Flynn. I don't know whether Woolsey's story is 100% accurate, but
and people should know Woolsey is also another former CIA director.
Yeah, he is, and he's also invested in Genie Energy in the Golan Heights, and he's
got some interesting investments.
Yeah.
Also, I think a lot of this stuff I think got set in motion before Flynn's role was exactly clear, because there was a lot of talk during the campaign that he would actually be the VP, that he would be the vice presidential nominee, and I think that probably kicked some of this into overdrive. The thought that he would be second, he would be a vice president to Trump, almost like a Dick Cheney type figure, meaning not only would he have an influence, but he could really be pulling the strings. I think that absolutely exacerbated what I think partly, one of the things you'll see about the Flynn fiasco here is how sloppy it is, how obvious it is. I mean, how many people could have possibly had access to the intercepted phone call between the Russian ambassador and Flynn? It's a very small group of people, which is why this investigation, which has taken years for some reason, well, actually, it's not a question of why it's taken so long, but is actually not going to be that difficult, right? There's only a handful of people who have access. This is considered, intercepted calls by the NSA, for those who don't know, is like the crown jewel of American intelligence, the intercepted phone calls of foreign leaders. Very few people, this is not something a low-level staffer at the National Security Council or the NSA or the CIA or the FBI would get access to. This is very high-level intelligence, which means it's a small group of people who would have had it to give it to David Ignatius at the Washington Post, which means you think it's kind of sloppy. Now, Obama apparently did kind of increase the distribution list for some of the stuff, which is interesting, to say the least. But even though he's expanded the distribution list, even that list isn't massive. It's not a phone book. It's a small group of people. And as you see from the unmasking list, I mean, there's some people on there who are interesting, like Samantha Power, the former UN ambassador, had access to this apparently. Joe Biden, which was the day of, it looks like the printing of the Washington Post story. But even so, it's not that many people. So I do think there was kind of a panic attack within the national security state about Flynn becoming either the vice president or the national security advisor. And I think people started developing a plan of attack against him in a state of frenzy and confusion and panic, because I think they made some pretty basic mistakes that if things continue on with Lindsey Graham now, Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican of South Carolina, who's not my favorite person, but if he actually even just subpoenas people and gets them to go on the record, it's not going to be, I don't think it would take that long, provided people aren't committing perjury, which would never rule that out. But to figure out who did this, it's really not that many people who could have done it. So
I think I once heard somebody say it was only about 20 people who were authorized to do something like this. But don't quote me on that, because I'm not exactly certain. But I just have one more item that I found to be significant in sort of why Flynn was such a target. And it goes back to Cy Hirsch's Military to Military article published in December 2015, back when Cy Hirsch could still get published. And this is such a fascinating article for so many reasons. Anyway, I have a couple paragraphs here. General Dempsey and his colleagues on the Joint Chiefs of Staff kept their dissent out of bureaucratic channels and survived in office. General Michael Flynn did not. Quote, Flynn incurred the wrath of the White House by insisting on telling the truth about Syria, unquote, said Patrick Lang, a retired Army colonel who served for nearly a decade as the chief Middle East civilian intelligence officer for the DIA. Quote, he thought the truth was the best thing, and they shoved him out. He wouldn't shut up, unquote. Flynn told me his problems went beyond Syria. Quote, I was shaking things up at the DIA, and not just moving deck chairs on the Titanic. It was radical reform. I felt that the civilian leadership did not want to hear the truth. I suffered for it, but I'm okay with that, unquote. In a recent interview in Der Spiegel, Flynn was blunt about Russia's entry into the Syrian war. Quote, "We have to work constructively with Russia. Whether we like it or not, Russia made a decision to be there and act militarily. They are there, and this has dramatically changed the dynamic. So you can't say Russia is bad, they have to go home." So that gives you a lot just in that paragraph here. And some of the things that Cy Hirsch reveals in this article, I don't know. I have to wonder whether Flynn may have been one of his sources. That is pure speculation. I don't have anything on that. But at this point in time, December 2015, Russia had just intervened. And a lot of people who are sort of level-headed about the Syrian war know that it was pretty much over then. The regime change operation was over at that point, except John Brennan, who it may have been Cy Hirsch, or I forget exactly who it was, who said that the Syrian regime change operation, which nobody ever admitted to, it was all covert, but amazingly out in the open. So many people knew about it. But they said it was John Brennan's baby, as Dan has mentioned, and he just would not see the reality of the situation, and he kept doubling down, and it kept getting dirtier and dirtier, and the arms were going into the hands of Al Qaeda and ISIS even, and it just it just got worse and worse. And so during the time frame, I'm going to segue a little bit here. During the time frame of Russiagate, let's say in the summer of 2016 and through the fall, when this frenzied thing was ginned up, this was also a time when Brennan was particularly stressed, right? Because Syria was, they had the failed coup in Turkey, and things were going really badly. I believe they were approaching, they're going to get back Aleppo, which was a real, end gamer kind of thing, although they, still didn't give up after that. But so it was a really, I could see Brennan judgment being particularly bad during this period of time because of kind of the amount of stress that he was under. And
Obama, Joanne, just to go on top of that, the operation was called Operation Timber Sycamore. Is that it?
Yeah.
And eventually Obama would publicly rebuke it, which is odd, but he would eventually publicly talk with Thomas Friedman of the New York Times and say the idea that these moderate rebels were going to become a fighting force was a quote-unquote fantasy, unquote. Now, I can only imagine if he said that publicly eventually when he threw in the towel on Timber Sycamore, what he was saying in private to Brennan.
Yeah,
like,
Brennan
get it together or get out. I'm sure he was hearing an earful. I'm sure Obama was all over him about the failure of this operation to actually produce results in Syria, despite the fact that they were spending billions of dollars. And, most of the people, shouldn't laugh too hard at this, but most of the people they were giving these weapons to would get in a fight with either the rebel forces, which were Al Qaeda, the Al Nusra, which was a branch of Al Qaeda, or they would get into a fight with the Syrian Arab army. And in either instance, they would immediately get obliterated. And what this ended up actually being is these moderate rebels were either getting killed or fleeing, and all their weapons were ending up in the hands of either the Syrian government or often in the Al Nusra Al Qaeda front, which you see all these U.S. weapons which were being fired by these Al Qaeda operatives. So it's just like a total disaster that Flynn kind of foresaw. And I think they didn't want to give up on it. When Joanne used that Hirsch quote, or the quote from Flynn, where he says, we basically have to work with Russia. That's realpolitik. That's reality.
It is, yeah.
You have to understand the neocon people who were in and out of the Obama government. Victoria Nuland's in there. Kagan and the others are outside agitating. And certainly people at the CIA like Brennan, they do not believe that. They think they can make Russia go home. Or they think Russia has no legitimate, quote-unquote, right to be there. And so they're zealots. That's the thing. They're not pragmatic. They're not cool pragmatists. People have this sort of Henry Kissinger-esque image. That's not them. They're fanatics. And they think Russia's involvement is completely illegitimate and they have to be pushed out. And so when Flynn says something like that, that could have triggered them as well. I'm just thinking of the different ways why they would have lost it so bad. But yeah, the program, the Operation Timber Sycamore is a complete disaster. and eventually Obama himself will repudiate it publicly.
And that's a really good point. And it's also a good time to bring up there's a bunch of veterans run this site called SOFREP, SOFREP. And one of them is Jack Murphy. He's now a well-known writer. He also wrote an article in which he interviewed was it Green Beret, some special operations forces, who said that they were doing training. So there were these operations rooms in Turkey and in Jordan, and they were training these fighters. They were going to be our proxies, right? And they were so upset about the operation. They were saying, you're putting us here to train terrorists. These people are Al Qaeda or Al Qaeda, sympathetic, and we're not going to train these guys. We're not going to train. So they actually they badmouthed and undermined the whole operation too. And so Jack Murphy wrote about it, and I'm sure before he wrote about it, those stories were circulating. So yeah, just to put a emphasis on your points there. And the other thing that we should, I think, consider is that at the end, those last few months of the Obama term, Obama was really burned out and ready to leave the White House, just like Bush before him. And I strongly believe that a lot of this was driven by the Clintons. I think the Clintons had already started to move in. Clinton, had all of her allies still in the State Department. And I think that the Clintons were calling the shots to some extent, or at the very least, some of the high-level people who were ambitious, like Brennan, definitely ambitious, they were trying to please the Clintons too. And the Clintons had a lot of reasons to be pissed off at Flynn too. So I think I went on longer than I intended to, but I think this is sort of really.
Oh, that's definitely the impetus behind Crossfire Hurricane.
I mean,
they think Hillary is going to be the president. They think Hillary's going to win, and they're trying to ingratiate themselves with her. They don't remember the entire DC political establishment thought Trump was going to lose. So a lot of these, dark arts or all this nasty operations are a lot of people who think they're doing a favor for the next president. Just keep that in mind.
Yeah, I think it's just logic, and I believe I've heard other people say this too, but I think these foundational things are, I don't know, I think they're really important. Maybe I'm just a little obsessed with this kind of stuff, but I'm always asking why. My mother said I've been doing it since the day I was born. But
Joanne, I think you're right that the foundational stuff is hugely important, and so that's one of the things that I think, particularly the House testimony that was recently released, and this the unmasking and who actually knew and listened to the Flynn call, and that is they had absolutely nothing this entire time, and yet Comey, Clapper, and Brennan led us, and so many, I guess not us particularly, but so many Americans to really believe that somewhere there was this secret evidence that Trump did conspire with Putin to steal the election. And so I don't know where this is best asked, which is, what happens now that all these people are, should be exposed as frauds, or maybe better, how do we explain, or how do the American people understand that what they heard for the past 3 years was absolute lies from all the people that are paid, or that they believe are paid to tell them the truth, whether it's Rachel Maddow, John Brennan, or whoever else. I don't know, Joanne, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, it's an astounding level of deceit, and I guess I always have to think of when people have conspiracy theories, and the debunkers are very fond of saying, well, thousands of people, knew the truth, would have had to go along with that lie, and that there's no way that could happen. It would have leaked. They wouldn't have all gone along. Well, look what we just saw for the last 3.5 going on 4 years. We had almost complete compliance in the media, except for a couple of shows. Even Fox News is not reliable in their daytime programming. They've got a few shows in the evenings who are, totally pro-Trump, but even they went along with some of it. And some of the things, there's this one foundational thing that no one will violate, and I think Tucker Carlson had Trey Gowdy on the other day, and he still won't budge on that Russia meddled in the elections. That's one thing that cannot ever be admitted that didn't happen or didn't happen significantly, because this is the alibi. This is the thing that keeps anyone from being held accountable with any kind of criminal aspects of it. Because if they can say that the Russians meddled in the elections, then they can say that the investigations were justified. They were just good patriots trying to protect their country. So there are some certain things like that. Nobody, even if they know the truth, they won't budge on it. They're very obedient to whomever it is that's calling the shots.
Well,
That's
also, okay, go ahead.
just real quick, that's a really, I think, key insight, Joanne, that as long as they could keep the Russian meddled narrative alive, there is enough there, unfortunately, I guess, to make it, oh, John Brennan just smelled a lot of smoke because the Russians were meddling around. And so maybe that is one of the reasons that it's so important to remember the work of like Gareth Porter and the Moon of Alabama blog debunking the Russian internet agency myth the internet agency research agency myth that, they influenced the election, and Gareth Porter breaking down how minuscule the, number of ads that they actually ran was, and explaining how it can't be anything. So, Dan, because there is really nothing that they've ever been able to prove or show for 3.5 years now that there's any evidence at all for any of their claims. I mean, at least, people who believe in UFOs could come up with blurry pictures every now or then. But look at like the Steele dossier. And it's completely like, just trash now. Either things are irrelevant, like, Donald Trump was at this event at this time, or it's like the P tape that it's false.
Well, the P tape was the most extreme of it. And even it's funny is that even Michael Isikoff, who's been one of the leaders of this, he partnered with a truly deranged person named David Korn over at Mother Jones, who was one of the biggest Russiagators of all time.
What a grifter.
And has completely beclowned himself during this whole thing. It's just sad. But Isikoff even said, like, yeah, I think the P tape was based on a rumor about a strip show that Trump saw years ago. Like, even he is saying, yeah, there's no P tape. But it's also worth noting that one of the transcripts that was released is the interview with the CrowdStrike representative. And he says straight up, we have never found any information to prove that the DNC server, which only they had access to, remember, the FBI never had access to it, the people who investigated it, which was CrowdStrike, a private company who was working on a contract, big conflict of interest, even they admitted when under oath, key point, we never found evidence that the Russians hacked it or exfiltrated the data. We don't have that. Meaning they can't prove, they have no solid evidence that the WikiLeaks cables, the releasing of the emails, the Podesta emails, came from Russian intelligence, which is one of the major underlying claims. And a bunch of other people who have said they knew it. These people went on TV and said, we know the Russians did it. There was this guy, Pawn All Things. I don't remember, people know him. He's a former GHQ. He has now protected his account. He's out. He went under, he had no information. The funniest one is this woman, Evelyn Farkas, who is now running for Congress, went on TV all over the place. Bill Maher, MSNBC, said, I know for a fact, I know that he was involved with a Russian collusion. She gets under oath. It was Trey Gowdy, according to the transcript. And he says, okay, well, what are you basing that on? She goes, nothing. He goes, so you have no information whatsoever from because she was in the government service and she was supposedly an expert in Russia and Eastern Europe. And she goes, yeah, I have nothing. So let's be clear. A lot of these people who went on TV and said they knew all these things and they had all the secret inside dope and said all these smears, basically, were completely lying. And when it came time to actually show that they had some information about a Russian collusion or Russian election interference, when they got under oath and were facing a perjury charge if they lied, they told the truth and said, yeah, I don't know anything. So,
I think they continued to lie, too. I think they just continued to lie after they testified that they...
Yeah, they continued. Oh, yeah, Evelyn Farkas continued to lie afterwards. Because remember, there's no penalty, legal and apparently political, thanks to places like NBC and CNN. There's no consequences to lying to the media or the public. That's not a crime. And apparently, if you're lying in the right way, there's no even political cost. So please understand, this is partly, yes, there were hardliners, and partly they're just incredibly cynical people who rode this for every ounce they could get out of it. She went from a minor, middling official within the Obama administration to a media star and she hopes a member of Congress. So all these cynical people who are in politics tried to get on the right side of this thing, and that is a big reason why this fueled. Like Rachel Maddow, does she really believe Russiagate? I don't know, but I do know she really believes in ratings, and she got some great ratings by becoming basically, liberal Alex Jones, or what is it, Benghazi for Karens, or whatever they're saying about Russiagate. It's these people really did cynically play this game, and it's hard not to, and that's what fueled it. It's partly cynicism from these actors who never knew anything, and then also I think a genuine fear of some sort of reckoning that never was going to come anyway if Flynn and Trump pursued this new policy course. Because some people, it's worth noting, have a financial interest in a new Cold War. Apparently, they might get it with China anyway, so they might have jumped the gun for no reason. But there are, people who want business. They want to have, they want to be, this defense establishment employs a lot of people, and a lot of people in D.C. who have, a Russian language background or a Russian studies background. They're not really employable in anything else. They don't really have marketable skills
after 9/11.
Russia. So keep in mind, there's a lot of cynical and economic interests involved in this whole Russiagate fiasco, and it's funny, but it's not funny.
I think that's a really key point, because I think when people try to make an absurdity of our point of view, like, oh, you don't think Russia interfered in the election, one of the things that I think they kind of put on us as alleging is that there's some kind of grand conspiracy behind it, that either Obama or Biden or Brennan or whoever like secretly pulled all these strings and orchestrated, and there was this kind of cabal and everybody was doing it to undermine Trump and you kind of point out that everybody has their own interests. Rachel Maddow knows that if she goes on TV and says the wind chill is -50 in Minnesota, and if Vladimir Putin turns on off the lights, your grandma's gonna freeze to death. And that's the threat we face because of Donald Trump. And she knows
I forgot about that story
through the roof.
You're not using a hypothetical, right, Kyle? You're talking about the one where they said they were going to hack the power grid. Oh, okay.
For real. Yeah.
For real.
The wind chill may not have been correct. It may have been like -32 or something, but that was really her point. And then, all the weapons makers, they benefit huge off of this. If Donald Trump moves towards détente with Russia, do we need the F-35? Do we need this new strategic bomber that Boeing's going to get huge amounts of money on? Do we need these aircraft carriers? Do we need to upgrade our nuclear arsenal? But now we're rolling back all of our nuclear treaties with Russia, and nobody has said anything. I mean, that's one of the incredible things about the
$1 trillion will be spent. $1 trillion. Also, remember,
that's
initially,
the conservative estimate.
Yeah, they were bullying. Well, for the new nuclear weapons, I don't know. Right. Who knows what else they're going to spend it on? F-35 itself is like $1 trillion, 1.5, whatever. But remember, initially when this happened and they started making these claims, Silicon Valley pushed back. There was an executive. His name was Rob Goldman at Facebook, and he initially, because he didn't get the memo, I guess, and he wasn't bullied yet by the Democrats, he said it's absolutely ridiculous to claim the Russian ads had any effect on the election. And Mark Zuckerberg said this initially too. He said, Rob Goldman said, most of them ran after the election and none of them had really any effect, and we would be able to see it because he was, a Facebook executive. He would see which ads played a role, and he was immediately dogpiled on social media and pressured, most notably by Senator Mark Warner.
Warner actually flew out.
Yeah, he flew. He took a trip out to Silicon Valley to scream at the executives, and then Goldman ended up having to apologize for saying that. But even initially, the Silicon Valley people were completely confused by the, quote, Russiagate thesis, which is that the Russians infiltrated social media and they hacked the DNC and they played this big mass conspiracy to get Trump elected. And I think one thing maybe people who listen to the show may not be as much aware of as elsewhere is the bitter, traumatic almost psychology of liberals who could not believe Trump won and needed a kind of self-reinforcing delusion to tell themselves that he had not won a fair election. And so when that delusional behavior ran into reality, it was like Rachel Maddow was there with the big pacifier and the blankie to say, let me help you retreat into a fantasy land where, you're in some John le Carre novel and the Russians are the problem, not, the country disagrees with you or you're not as popular as you thought. And I just think the Rob Goldman case is so illustrative of what happened, which is here's a guy on Facebook who can see the traffic, right? He can see these ads. He's like, nothing really happened. They didn't have the election. And he gets bullied, I'm sure, by corporate leadership and definitely by Senator Warner of Virginia and the rest of the Democratic caucus. I'm sure Nancy Pelosi, who represents San Francisco, for those who don't know, into saying, oh, I'm sorry, I guess they did. I guess they did hack. Now that I think about it, and then I've had Wright think in the true Orwellian sense.
Well, you guys, it's true. It's very, very true that the Russiagate narrative and everything that spilled from it served a lot of people's purposes and agendas. That's true. But the issue of whether there was a leader, a high-level person who was sort of keeping it all together and driving it, I think there was. I always thought that
Really?
the Clinton.
Who do you think it was?
I always thought it was the Clintons. They had the most to lose and the most to hide, and there had been such enormous efforts to prevent her from being, prosecuted for or even exposing the things that she did, and then, after the fact, helping her deal with the just catastrophic failure that she had just, accomplished, if you will. But now it looks like, it wasn't just the Clintons. Obama has been in the back.
True.
Obama. So I think the Clintons and the Obamas have a strange relationship. I know they were sort of bitter enemies for a long time, but in this, I think they had a common goal. And I do think that because the amount of power that it would take.
They couldn't have done. Let's be clear. Those operations against Flynn could not have been done, including the Crossfire Hurricane, all this other stuff would not have been done without Obama's tacit, implicit, or I think with Brennan, explicit approval. So it's not like these guys can just run their own program, although people have accused Comey of doing that before, in fairness. But
Edgar.
Obama, and I'm sure Clinton influenced him, but Obama is in on it. That's what's become clear. I'm not sure what the element of his role is. Senator Graham, it's worth noting, said he was cautious about subpoenaing Obama. He's saying he's not sure he was willing to do that because it would, quote, set a bad precedent, even though Trump has asked him to. This is the investigation of the investigation. But they set the conditions. But so, Joanne, I think that's true. There's people at the top who are pushing for this. Certainly Brennan's, CIA director is pretty high up. But there's also just the environment of Russiagate where there's a bunch of like grifters and peddlers and liars and fools like Evelyn Farkas or the Krasenstein brothers or Seth Abramson or these other host of grifters who were writing fan fiction or or Democratic fundraisers. All these people who jumped in, I don't think they were getting directions. I think they're just crass opportunists.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that I talk about this a lot with my partner is I've been shocked by what I've seen. I've never seen anything taken to the extremes that this has been taken to. Everything that's happened since the 2016 election has just been continually shocking as to how openly, brazenly the power is being orchestrated, is being exercised and orchestrated. It's just astounding. And one of those things, one of the biggest things, is that it's the first time I can remember that I know of in history where one president, the peaceful transition of power, which is supposedly one of the most, revered and one of the things we are most proud of in this country, is that no matter, who wins and switches parties and enemies, change, power changes hands among enemies. But this time, a peaceful transition of power was openly thwarted in numerous ways. Right from the very day of the election when Hillary refused to concede and then came out in her purple funeral clothing the next day. And then there were the lawsuits, and then there were the efforts to get the Electoral College.
Oh, the Hamilton electors. I forgot about that. Right. The Hamilton electors.
To get the electors to not give their vote to Trump, even if they're the people they represented, the area they represented had voted for Trump. And then there was the 25th Amendment which wasn't just a rumor. We have Rod Rosenstein talking about wearing a wire or trying to organize, the right number of cabinet members who would turn on Trump. And so he would never be, first they were trying to get him never to be inaugurated. And then they were trying to immediately remove him. And then you had Comey in there still, working the gears. And then when he gets fired, boom, get Robert Mueller. They put him under a special prosecutor. And then as soon as, Barr comes in and shuts that down, boom, then we have impeachment, right? And, after the impeachment's over, we're in a pandemic. I mean, I don't even know.
But do you believe Trump's theory on this, basically, which is, I mean, he doesn't say it coherently. He doesn't say it much coherently, but he's basically saying that if Jeff Sessions didn't recuse himself, this would have never been a thing. I mean, they probably would have tried to get him for something else, and I wonder if that's true, and I kind of almost agree. Like if Jeff Sessions had said, look, we're not investigating any of this, knock it off, CNN, shut up, we're done. If he hadn't been cowed,
I would go back, and it's good.
Dumb Southerner. He was a dumb Southerner.
I definitely think that's right, because I think the length and the the Mueller report is coming, like that narrative, that mantra kept all the people on board the Russiagate train for a very long time. And then when it came out that the Mueller report fell flat on its face, I think fortunately, from the Russiagators' point of view, it was too long for them to read. There was enough like little quotes in there that as long as you take out keywords, it could look like there was at least a little bit of something. And then he had his testimony, but he was kind of incoherent, and so people assumed that there was more. I think, but I really think that's right, that Jeff Sessions was the guy that screwed Trump more than anyone else in all of this.
I mean, he was a cow. He was like a deer in the headlights. But I would say it goes back. He never should have fired Flynn.
Right. No, I mean, we said that at the time. Like I said,
we did.
This is the beginning of the end of his presidency if he does this, because it will mean that they can see for a minute there. Trump's strength, his incredible strength, was that he was completely immune to elite pressure, either from the media or the parties. He basically just said, I'm going to do my own thing, up yours. And I think he tried to strike a different tone when he was president. Like the first was, he said, people said, are you going to actually prosecute Hillary Clinton? And he said, no, I won't actually do that. And he kind of started and then he gave in on Flynn. And we said at the time, this is the beginning of the end, because once you give in on Flynn, there's blood in the water.
Blood in the water, yeah.
Blood in the water. In fact, I use that exact phrase. They're going to come at you every step of the way. If he had just stood tall and said, I don't care what you say, Flynn's my guy, that's just how it's going to be. If he had done that, I think he would have had a totally different presidency. He still would have, of course, because I think he enjoys trolling them so much, he still would have had outrage, but they would have never tried all this, leaking and back. It wouldn't have mattered. It's like, yeah, I don't care. I'm immune to media pressure. I don't care. But instead he gave in, and then, but I do agree that I think he's right about Sessions. If Sessions had stood tall. But yeah, Flynn was the first. That's why Flynn's important, because Flynn was the first domino to fall. And it was clearly a mistake on multiple fronts, we now know.
And Comey admits that I'm still amazed that he's in this forum. And I think the woman from MSNBC is talking to him, and they're on a stage in some forum, and there's a very friendly audience. And they talk about, how'd that happen, where, the FBI went over and questioned Flynn in the White House. And he's like, I sent them. He brags about it. The audience laughs. And then he admits that he took advantage of them being newbies in the White House and having no idea what the chaos in the beginning. He said, I don't think I could have gotten away with this in previous White Houses. And he even mentions the Bush White House, which is sort of notoriously not.
Yeah, I mean, Flynn could have completely thrown them out of his office. Like, who are you again? I work for the President of the United States. Get the hell out of my office.
Yeah, I mean, he knew these guys, and they said they were just going to work out some security,
but Michael Flynn has to know better that when the FBI comes to your door, that, they're not just your buddies looking to have a nice chat, and that, you have to have your lawyer present or, not agree to do it. So I guess, that is one, like, the craziest things about everything here. So much of it revolves around Michael Flynn, who I don't think is a particularly sharp person. I mean, I understand that he disagreed with Obama's, policy, and wasn't a fan of Obama's drone policy, and that's another place where him and Brand disagreed. Of course, his issue was, he wanted more like kinetic boots on the ground type.
Yeah, it wasn't a left wing disagreement.
Right.
It was like
Yeah,
it was a right wing
yeah.
disagreement.
It's so, I guess it's incredible that as we're now in Trump's fourth year of, his presidency, we're lamenting that, he didn't keep Michael Flynn on early in the early days. But, looking at how warmongering the Trump administration has been with absolutely, kind of for it almost, it seems everybody is kind of content with keeping up the narrative that he's not or at least the left wing, at least, he's acting in the interest of Vladimir Putin, when in fact he's absolutely, destroyed the U.S. relationship with Russia. I think far more than Hillary Clinton could have even dreamed. So
yeah, the problem is he
that's
destroyed. Yeah, you're completely right. And I mean, look at the position in Ukraine. Even Obama wasn't going to send offensive weapons in Ukraine, which is, this is why it looks like it is orchestrated from the top, to Joanne's point, because it looks like in order to disprove Russiagate, Trump went completely overboard and was so antagonistic that it did things that even Obama didn't do, which is like give offensive weapons in Ukraine. So it's kind of, it's a strange, I mean, he's not been a peacenik. I mean, my view of him always was he might bring down the American empire, but not on purpose. Which, when the Soleimani killing happened, I was like, this guy's an idiot. I was like, maybe he will bring us down, but not on purpose. So I never thought he was he was a peacenik, or I think his opposition to Bush, or it was just kind of good politics because the country was sick of war. And when he was saying things, Jeb saying, my brother kept us safe, and he goes, the Twin Towers came under his reign. That's not keeping us safe, Jeb. Low energy. When he was saying things like that, it was popular. It was a populist message. But in office, he's absolutely not. He's continued the war machine going, but he has done it to a degree that's so incompetent and polarizing that other countries are refusing to cooperate with us a lot. And if enough countries refuse to cooperate with the American empire, including allies, by the way, including Western Europe, it's going to be hard to keep that thing going. So he's, I always thought he was the anti-imperialist candidate, but not because he was consciously anti-imperialist, for the record.
Right.
Yeah,
well,
I don't think he's really a man of conviction. I just have one last point about Flynn, and I'm not going to do my disclaimers about who I do and don't like, or I'm just so tired of doing it. I'm just going to say what I think. But so Flynn, it's very popular to say he's not the sharpest tool in the shed. He's a clown. He's this and that. But for a guy who's so incompetent, and they sure did go after him hard, so he must have been good at something. Because, as all the reasons that I stated why they hated him so much and went after him so hard. But it just does are kind of conflicting. Is if he's a bumbling fool, why did they have to go to such lengths to go after the guy? That's puzzling for me.
I mean, maybe it's part of Flynn not seeing the bigger picture going on around him at times, which is why he signs off on that 2012 DIA report about the growing Islamic Caliphate. I think if he understood the politics of the Obama administration and really was looking for a career, he probably wouldn't have written that report. So my kind of understanding of Flynn was that he wasn't the sharpest guy, but definitely didn't understand DC.
Yeah, he was naive. I mean, I can agree with that much of it. It's also, you have to remember, a lot of these people in D.C. are not the sharpest tools in the sheds. That's why they're a lot of them are just loyalty appointments. John Brennan was a terrible Middle East analyst. He got fired, and the only way he was able to maintain his position was he became a presidential briefer, which is where he, lucky for him, buddied up to George Tenet, who ended up maneuvering his way into becoming CIA director. So Brennan is a product not of being like the leader of the analytical unit of the CIA. He made the right friends, and he had great social connections, which is probably why most of his CIA programs, the drone strikes or the moderate rebel programs, are complete disasters, because he's actually not very good at what he does. But the one thing he knows what to do is the one thing Flynn apparently didn't know what to do, which is have good political instincts or have some sort of a sense of the politics, because anybody who had that would have never agreed to talk to the FBI. As John, of course, then again, John Kiriakou did talk to the FBI, much to it, and they tried to set him up, and I guess kind of succeeded. So
There's like that camaraderie among people who, are officers in the national security state. They don't believe that they'll be so betrayed because they always protect each other.
whereas the people at the top know there's a turf war, and that's one of the reasons American intelligence is so dysfunctional. Is because there's all these little fiefdoms, right? The FBI and the CIA hate each other. The CIA hates the DIA. They all kind of hate each other. I agree. So I would say, just to be fair to Flynn, he had good policy instincts, but his political instincts, it's kind of amazing that he lucked into the position with Trump, because Trump's kind of a weird thing to have happened, right? Imagine if Trump hadn't happened, would Flynn have any position anywhere? So it's kind of like, looks like it's kind of like Brennan with George Tenet. It's serendipity, I guess is the way to look at it. Not intelligence.
No, I think
not strategy.
Right about that. But Flynn, I think, was like the first general to really sign on to the Trump campaign. So I think that was something that gave Trump a little bit of legitimacy in a lot of people's eyes, because everybody was like, oh, imagine this guy with his finger on the nuclear button. He's going to say you're fired and just hit it. But if there's a general who was the former director of military intelligence saying that you're all right to be president, that seems to, for I think a lot of people to be like, okay, well, he plays a buffoon on TV, but really he's competent and capable enough to, not accidentally fall asleep on the nuclear button and kill us all. We are at an hour here, so maybe we should, start to find a place to wrap up. And, kind of maybe give some closing thoughts. I don't know if you want to start that, Joanne.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to use my time to just reiterate something that Pat Lang said. He said Flynn incurred the wrath of the White House by insisting on telling the truth about Syria. And he said that Flynn told me his problems went beyond Syria. I was shaking things up at the DIA, not just moving deck chairs on the Titanic. It was radical reform. I felt civilian leadership did not want to hear the truth. I suffered for it, but I'm okay with that. So I would say that Flynn was one of the few people who had actually spent a lot of time in combat. And one of the things we know about him is that he developed relationships with his fellow, people around him, and he had some very loyal, teammates or followers. And I think, maybe this is my speculation on my part, that experience, that I don't know if that was his first real combat experience, but it was an embarrassing thing, right? We were losing. This is a bad thing for a general, for all the generals. And I think he was just completely fed up with how incompetent and corrupt things had gotten. And I think he sort of through political, I think he decided to tell the truth about it and to try to, I think he was a 3-star general at that point. And he probably thought he could make a difference. He could change things. And he was up against a very large wall that set out to destroy him way before Trump even became. But I think that maybe having been in combat and in such a terrible war, mostly, he did terrible things too. But I think that experience may have had a big influence on why he did what he did. So that's what I have to say. Sorry.
I'll go ahead and just jump in real quick and say that, from this going on for 4 years now, I guess, which is so absurd. I was starting to feel a little bit burnt out on it over the past year. I have felt like, especially by the end of 2018, that any meaningful claim made by the Russiagators had been thoroughly debunked, and there wasn't anything left to stand on. And yet it didn't appear that the truth was going to come out. And so it was kind of like, playing a game and ending in a 0-0 tie, where you did everything you could, but you couldn't score any points. And so you tie, and everybody just kind of goes home thinking what they had coming in. But over the past like 2 or 3 months, I think a lot of progress has been made in revealing the origins and the truth of what actually happened with this whole Russiagate narrative. And I'm very excited about getting some more of that truth to come out with, the charges being dropped against Concord management, and that I think helping to reveal the whole fraud around the Internet Research Agency, the charges being dropped against Michael Flynn, that revealing again the whole fraud around this having anything to do with Russiagate or conspiring to hack the election, and now the unmasking, and the list of who unmasked, in a way kind of unmasking themselves, the Obama administration officials who went and looked into this, having more clues behind who potentially was again that original leaker to the WASPO. I think that the John Brennan claim is very strong, although Samantha Powers is a very dangerous person, and I saw her name very first on that list. And
yep, she was first. That's right.
That's always a big red flag for me is to see her name everywhere. She's a warmonger. She loved the war in Libya and Syria, and UN ambassador there at the end of the Obama administration. So I think there's a lot more truth to come out, and I'm starting to get hopeful that we're really going to expose some of the Obama era warmongers, and that they really just cared about continuing their foreign policy, and that they've had a lot of success in hemming in Trump's foreign policy. He hasn't ended any of the wars. He's expanded NATO. He's kept the sanctions on Russia. He's ramped up the sanctions on Iran, North Korea, Cuba, Venezuela. It seems like they kind of got their way in hemming in Trump's foreign policy, but now maybe we could get our way in exposing some of them, if at the very least, liars and frauds, and not throwing them in jail for being treasonous. So
okay.
I'll let you take it.
You want me to wrap up? Okay.
Yeah.
So some closing thoughts and some things to look forward to. So I think there is a tail end, there is a coda to the Russiagate saga, which I can agree with Kyle. I was also getting a little sick of it and kind of like, all right, well, we just wasted 3 years. There's been some, also, by the way, people should know, on the left, not everyone on the left has gone tinfoil hat on this Russiagate stuff. There's been a lot of people on the left. One name that comes to mind is Aaron Mate, who is furious about this, and Glenn Greenwald, of course, Glenzilla, never forget about Glenn, who have said, like, look at how much time and energy was wasted, because these are anti-Trump people who say Russiagate has sucked the air out of the room of all the other things they could have gone after Trump about, and it's all been this conspiracy theater and national security state theater rather than whatever his immigration policies, even emoluments if you really care, or other things that Trump's done. So there is what's called in economics an opportunity cost, meaning if you do one thing, you can't do something else. If you go to here, you can't be there. And so the constant focus was great for cable news, which we've learned in this primary season at least is very powerful because they basically made Joe Biden the nominee. But so it was great for ratings, but it wasn't good for the country, and it certainly wasn't true. So there's that. So the left is also upset with this conspiracy mongering, and I know I've been frustrated by it. And I thought it was always BS from the beginning, and I still believe that, and I think we have been, dare I say, vindicated. But going forward, what's really important is not just what Bill Barr and Richard Grenell, who Trump recently put in, who did the unmasking. Something to really watch for people who care about the Russiagate and the comeuppance of the Obama officials who were behind it is this independent investigation by U.S. Attorney Durham. This is U.S. Attorney for the Connecticut, John Durham. He has his own investigation going on, and he has been going, quote unquote, full throttle all over this to get to the bottom of this. So while there may be hearings now, Senator Graham has talked about them. I know Senator Rand Paul has said he wants information. Obviously, there's been a shakeup today. Actually, maybe for those who don't know, Richard Burr, who was caught in some sort of insider trading scandal, like he dumped a bunch of stocks when he found out about COVID-19, the coronavirus. So he stepped down temporarily from chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee. For those who don't know, the House is controlled by the Democrats. They're not going to do any investigating of Russiagate. They're not going to investigate investigators there. That's not going to happen. So it'll have to be done in the Republican-controlled Senate. So I don't know who replaces Richard Burr, if it's someone who wants to do this or not on the Intelligence Committee. Lindsey Graham has shown an interest in wanting to do this. Rand Paul has shown an interest. Josh Hawley of Missouri, Republican of Missouri, has shown an interest. But all the while this is going on, and all the while Richard Grenell and Bill Burr, separately and out of sight, has been John Durham, the U.S. Attorney for Connecticut, researching this, reviewing this. And so even if you get a little discouraged on what's happening now, please understand there is another shoe that will drop, and it could be pretty significant when it does. So keep that in mind.
It could, but it
we don't know. We don't know what he's doing. We can't see anything he's doing. He could have a whole bunch of bodies lined up, or it could be a dud. Although I have to say, I find it very hard, given what we already know about Peter Strzok and Lisa Page and McCabe. By the way, we forgot this. Let me add this now that as we're closing out. Andrew McCabe, not only is he in trouble for lying to the FBI about a leak, which he was not prosecuted for, he was leaked something to the Wall Street Journal. He's been accused by one of the FBI agents of trying to alter a 302 on Flynn, meaning the report on Flynn, right? The report, that's what they're called, 302s. He's saying he tried to rewrite the report. For those who don't know, the FBI, unlike professional law enforcement, does not record their interviews. They rely, which is good because they try to lie about people, and it's hard to do if you have a recording of it, I guess. In any case, they write something called a 302, which is a narrative. And one of the FBI investigators said Andrew McCabe tried to tamper with the evidence. So Andrew McCabe could be, once again, in danger of being grand juried for an indictment. So keep in mind, I don't know what John Durham's doing. Nobody does. But this could be an interesting development in Russiagate. So don't write it off yet. We don't know. That's my closing point.
Yeah, I mean, I hope he is, because I don't care which political side it benefits, but just to try to set some of the things right. But he's taking an awful lot of time. Bill Barr has pretty much admittedly said that his goal is to restore the reputation of the law enforcement. He's really talking about the whole national security state. And, they just renewed FISA. And Durham is taking a lot of time, and time is really running out, right? All kinds of electoral politics is getting mixed in with it now, and Trump's in real trouble. So I do wonder whether some of this rapid declassification and release of information, some of the things that we're seeing around by a relative few people who are getting some of this information out, I think some of them were waiting for Durham. And I wonder whether they're starting to lose faith. I always worried that Barr and Durham were just going to drag this thing out until, to the election or soon before the election, until it was too late to really do anything about it, like, prosecute anybody, and then just get Trump out of office, and then they could all sweep it under the rug. So I have less confidence.
That's you think he's trying, he's dragging his feet on purpose?
Yeah, I do.
I don't.
Well, no, I don't. I have a feeling.
I have a feeling there's a bomb that's going to drop. We don't know. We're speculating. But
I'm afraid of that.
You're a skeptic. You're a skeptic. I'm a little bit optimistic on the Durham. I think when he finally comes out, he's going to have something to show for it. Otherwise, he's an idiot, right? I mean, otherwise he spent months upon months. Then again, I guess it could be I guess it could be Mueller report part 2.
Depends on your perspective. He's an idiot or he's a hero. Right. So right. I am a skeptic, Dan, but I'm rooting for you. I hope you're right.
And this is the guy that punted on the torture program charges too, or at least was part of it. So I think we've seen him do this in the past. So I'll break the tie and say I like Joanne. I'm skeptical on Durham, although we get some of these officials in front of the Senate, and I think Rand Paul would ask some real questions at least. I'm not sure how interested Lindsey Graham would be in really undermining the authority of American law enforcement, but I think Rand Paul go for it. And I believe, Ron Wyden also sits on that committee, who at least sometimes is critical of law enforcement. So we could get some interesting questions going on. I know Wyden's a liberal and everything, but maybe that will be the next one if we don't get together sooner to talk about what happens with Durham and where we go from here, as we hopefully will continue to get the truth. So Joanne, Dan, thank you guys so much for doing this again. I think it was an excellent follow-up to our original series. And everybody, make sure you check out aroundtheempire.com and check out the Foreign Policy Focus podcast over at the Libertarian Institute.
All right, thanks Kyle.